Welcome to Talking Early Years, a showcase training podcast with Ellen Roberts
and Gemma Carr.
Hello and welcome to today's Talking Early Years podcast, and welcome to our Safeguarding Short. In this episode, we're going to be discussing fabricated and induced illnesses. So let's delve in. Hi Gemma, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you, Ellen?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you.
Good.
So tell me, Gemma, what is fabricated and induced illness, or FII?
So this is a form of abuse, so most often involving the caregiver, which is predominantly parent, who makes up, exaggerates or deliberately causes illness in somebody that they are caring for. And typically this is a child. So it used to be called the Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Okay.
And some of the things that we see is sort of for the carer may well be fabricating symptoms, which is sort of lying about maybe seizures, vomiting, pain the child might be having, or allergies. They could be exaggerating real symptoms, so they seem worse than they actually are. They induce illnesses, so they make it happen. So, for example, poisoning, suffocation, causing infections, interfering with wounds and them not healing properly, or falsifying medical records or samples. So contaminating, for example, urine samples, which could then lead to the child being taken to many doctor's appointments, often unnecessarily, or undergoing unnecessary tests, or even treatments in some cases, which can be dangerous.
Fascinating. And I noticed there as well, you mentioned that it was previously called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So again, just to make the differentiation that Munchausen syndrome, it is now referred slightly differently, but that is where the individual is maybe faking or inducing or exaggerating illness or physical symptoms, but in the same way. So Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or the fabricated induced illness, is somebody else faking that on behalf of another person. So they are both psychological conditions, and both have an element of wanting sympathy. There is a mental health condition related to this element of safeguarding, and obviously it can cause significant physiological impacts as well. So in terms of legislation regarding this, FII falls under the child protection part of the Children's Act of both 1989 and 2004. It is a form of physical abuse, but as we say, it's a psychological form of abuse as well. So it does go into emotional abuse too. Under Working Together to Safeguard Children 2023, it's also referenced, and it may also be considered physical assault or grievous bodily harm depending on the act. And in some very, very tragic cases, it can actually result in death, which would then fall under some element of potentially murder or manslaughter for perpetrator as well. So what is the impact of it then? It's quite a significant part of safeguarding.
So for the child that it's happening to, physical harm, or like you say, death in some situations, emotional and psychological trauma, long-term distrust of healthcare, and developmental or mental health problems. So it's quite, and again, short-term and long-term, that can span through into for the rest of their lives as well.
Absolutely. And other longer-term physical health problems. So over medication, for example, could affect the liver, the kidneys, and later in life, especially having those conditions caused by an imaginary or falsified condition to begin with as well.
Yeah.
So in setting, what are we looking out for? Because it's quite a difficult area of safeguarding.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and it can have things to look out for, but as we say, it's very hard to detect. So it could be things to be looking out for. So symptoms don't really match up with test results. Again, we're not really seeing those test results, but you could kind of go, that was different to what you said last week, or the parents dad might say one thing, mother might say the other. Illnesses that only occur when the caregiver is present.
Right.
Frequent hospital visits with no clear diagnosis or conclusion. A caregiver who seems unusually eager for tests or procedures. So again, kind of pushing for things or kind of requiring that bit more regularly. But one thing that to kind of be aware of is it can look like good parenting, and this isn't a thing for you to think about and go, oh, every single parent is doing this, but it can be that extension of that good parent, and kind of can just be that bit more.
Absolutely. It is very difficult, as you say, because in a lot of parenting, especially if you are a new parent, it's your first child, there is an element of health anxiety as well. Of course there is, and depending on your own trauma, you know, you could be very cautious of a child in their sleep because you've previously suffered the tragic incident of a sudden infant death syndrome. So professionals are rightfully cautious about, first of all, accusing parents of this, but second of all, missing things. It's often that we say, you know, a mother's instinct or a parent's instinct, and sometimes parents have to fight for a doctor to look at certain symptoms. So there is a bit of a balance here, especially if it goes wrong, because that could be career altering for that healthcare practitioner. But red flags, again, you know, just to reiterate some of the things you've said there, is multiple professionals independently feeling something isn't right. And that includes us in early years as well, knowing that actually when that child's in nursery, this isn't happening. So what's happening at home? Discrepancies between reported and observed symptoms. The child improving when they are separate from the caregiver or certain caregivers, especially if mum and dad, for example, are separated. It could be that they have these symptoms. It's not always that it's fabricated or induced as well. It could be an indicator of home life. So if they're constantly, you know, having mum on the weekend, coming in on Monday with you know, a poorly tummy, perhaps there's something going wrong in the diet there, or in terms of cleanliness in the home, for example. So it doesn't necessarily, again, mean FII, but something to be aware of. Also, records being from different services, when they are brought together, and that can paint that wider picture that we talk about in safeguarding, and where we are putting together a jigsaw puzzle. A piece on its own doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture. So when records are brought together and we share that information, that can also indicate FII. And then finally, a safeguarding focused paediatric review sometimes takes place, and that could indicate where FII may occur. Of course, being in early years, you will be asked for things like the records and all of the documentation that you've taken for that child when they've had bumps, grazes, illness, that kind of thing. So again, record keeping is incredibly important for this reason, as well as everything else that we typically keep records for.
Absolutely. So if we are concerned or need a little bit of support, where can we go, Ellen?
So primarily, as we always say, the NSPCC and the NHS website are your primary sources of information. They are fact-checked and relevant to the UK. But also what I'd encourage people to do is, because FII is quite an unknown element of safeguarding and something that once you talk about it, people kind of recognise, but familiarise yourself through things like popular culture. So for example, there's a film on Netflix with Sarah Paulson called Run from 2020, or again on Netflix there's a docuseries called Take Care of Maya from 2023, both of which feature FII but in a more practical way as well, so you can recognize how it actually manifests and looks like in reality. And then finally, on our Showcase Training website, on our safeguarding page, we also have an article about FII, what it looks like, how to protect against it, and where you can find further information.
Amazing. Thank you, Ellen. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And as always, safeguarding is a big topic. And if you have any concerns, you can reach out to your settings designated safeguarding lead, or to the Showcase Training safeguarding lead, or directly to Mash or Lado.
Don't forget to like, share and follow this podcast to stay updated. And as always, let's keep the conversation about early years going. Until next time, take care and keep making a difference.